Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? Now we're actually at the end of April. We had to check an episode. So if you're listening to the episodes weekly and I tell you that where we are in the month, it's because we had to check an episode and just threw everything off. Anyways, if you listen to episode 241, which was a solo episode that I did, I don't know what the title is yet. Jen and I had a little bit of a hiccup. And I think in that episode, I called it a rupture. I recorded the day just really moments after it happened. And now that I've had a week to process, I've had 2 sessions with my coach. And Jen and I have had a chance to process it. It was a hiccup. And we come back and we talk about it. We didn't really discuss exactly what we were going to talk about in this episode, but we talk about what it was like. I talk about the wounding that came up for me, how I got blended, how I've been expecting Jen to meet needs that she can't meet anymore. I am hoping that this is a really enlightening episode. I don't think people talk about this very much. I don't think people that are in relationship with each other and have these kinds of hiccups and attachment wounds come up talk about this live. I am hoping that this is going to be a really beneficial episode for you. If it's not, that's okay too. I have no control over that. But I think that the strengths that Jen and I have, it's really relational. And this was the first time in 5 years that we really had something pretty significant come up where I had feelings about something she didn't have the capacity. And it's really brought up some healing around some pretty intense wounding that I knew was there, but I really didn't understand what it was. And it wasn't until Jen was dating someone. Jen has been in the process of dating, but for some reason it just really came up and it felt like it was about her and who she was dating. And it's not, it's really about my wounding, but how we worked through it, how we had this hiccup, the fears that came up for us. I tend to go into a fawn response when I'm feeling really angry. And we talk about conflict and why conflict may be difficult for people. I think it's a really rich episode and I'm hoping that it is helpful to you. And if not, that's okay too. And now on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, my dear. I'm doing okay. How about you today?
I'm good. I've been really productive, but I had a couple things that just really annoyed me. I just had to shift a couple things around today and I shifted and other things didn't shift and that annoyed me. And that's hard. You know, it's hard when I show up and other people don't and it's frustrating and I understand that things happen. But there were just a number of things and those things are challenging to me and allowing myself to say that and feel it. And I think this is part of my autism and masking, that change and disruption are difficult for me. And as someone who's autistic, we don't like change. I don't like change. And I think because I associate being called inflexible, rigid, things like that, I go overboard to go like, it's okay. It's like, to minimize it instead of saying it's disruptive and it's frustrating. Will I survive? Do I manage? Of course I do. And it's effing annoying when it happens. And I think that's part of letting go of my internalized ableism and letting it be okay to say it's annoying. It's annoying when I want to do things or I show up and other people don't. It's annoying to me and letting that be okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I've really been aware of like just the power of naming things. And how validating it is. And then half the time, instead of trying to stuff it down and mask it, if you can just name it, it hits the air and it's been named and validated. And then for me anyway, it's easier to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked briefly before we started recording about what we're going to talk about. We really don't have a plan. I think both of us have just kind of like, oh, this thing happened and it's over. So this is episode 242. If you listen to 241, you and I were scheduled to record together last Wednesday. We hopped on, you asked how I was, and I had some stuff come up that I don't even think that I knew that it was there. And you had been going through a lot of stuff. You had a minute where you were feeling grounded and together, and then this really surprised you and hit you from a place that you didn't anticipate it. So you didn't have the capacity to hear what was going on with me. I've had some major attachment wounds come up. Oh my gosh. And so we stayed on the recording. We didn't record, but we stayed on together for probably 40, 45 minutes, taking turns crying, trying to figure out where we were going to go, acknowledging that we love each other, we care about each other. And this is really the first time where we haven't been able to sort something out in the moment. And in that moment, it felt like a rupture to me. That was the word that I was using. I'd already had therapy once that week. I had a second session that week, and then I just had another session on Monday. You and I did some pretty deep healing work. You held space for me as I did a lot of grief and anger work, because what is going on with you currently in your life is activating trauma from my childhood, and it's not about you, but that's what activated it. So you and I have talked in this last week as we've been kind of coming back together, and you went away for, I think, 4 days. So we really didn't have much contact while you were gone. But we talked about coming back together and kind of providing an update. So that's sort of where we're at. I want to give you a chance to share anything if you want to. And we don't know where we're going with this episode. So we had to check an episode that I loved because of technical problems. So, wah.
Yeah, we should try to recreate that one if we can.
Yeah.
But for now, for this one, trying to find my way back in, right? I mean, I know we did do a lot of talking before I went away for a couple of days or 4 days. And I'm so glad that we were able to, in that moment, I remember thinking, even as I was in it, like, oh, this is it. This is the good example of what happens for whatever reason when someone doesn't have capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that you were too much in that moment. I think we've been trying to frame it more as what is going on. I had reached sort of like a tentative grounding place and then just didn't have literal room, right? And I do love that we were able to hang in there. It was very tearful and intense, and keeping the values, right? Of the values of the friendship, values of like trust. And like, we'll talk about this when like it's almost like realizing that when I'm that tapped out, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we hung in there sort of waiting. And then it couldn't. And it really is okay to be like, okay, we're going to stick a pin in here, regain some of that regulation and groundedness, which we did quit pretty quickly, but couldn't together, which was new. On a different week, it would have been fine. You know, there was a certain perfect storm of variables in my life where I was just like, woof. I felt like whitewater rafting. I was like, whoops, I'm over. I'm in the rapids.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've had it where we've both been there at the same time.
No. And since that time, I'm getting really clear that I've been in what I'm going to call a reenactment with you. So I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this to preserve your privacy, my trauma privacy, because I wasn't the only one that created the trauma. So if there's some vagueness here, you're going to have to trust that it's here for a reason. But I had some pretty severe attachment wounding growing up, and where I was kind of somebody's partner. I was very young. I was a child. We're talking very, very young, kind of the co-parent, co-regulator. And then when a third party would enter into this relationship, I lost that position and I wasn't centered. My needs weren't centered. And I was pretty much abandoned at a very young age for periods of time, depending on when there would be a third person that would come in. And I've known this intellectually, but I haven't known what it has felt like in my body until you started dating. And I've been working through it, and I thought I was doing really well. And even when we had this pinch last week when we went to record and didn't, that you had said that you were surprised because we normally ask for consent. I have something difficult. Are you in a place to hear it? And when you said that, I didn't even realize, you asked how I was and I told you. And because I was so in it, I just didn't even realize that it was going on to have the presence to say, do I have consent? Are you in a place to hear this? And that to me just says that I'm so in it. So when I say I'm reenacting something with you, I'm really starting to get clear on, I'm putting you in that role of the person who wasn't present for me and expecting, feeling hurt and injured and abandoned. And it's not about you. That's coming from a really young place. The positive thing is that it helped me really get in touch with those feelings because I was imagining that you were, quote, doing it to me again as I experienced it. And it's not. I'm an adult. You can't do anything to me. This isn't your responsibility. We've had this great gift of you being able to hold space for me when I'm doing a lot of grief work. Normally, people don't do that in friendships, in these types of relationships. And as I'm getting clear about this is not about you, this is about my wounding and something that happened, I want to center myself and my wounding and be more responsible for that. And so that I'm not acting that out with you in our relationship. And so that's been part of the adjustment. And so, but I have these really young parts. And when you went away the first night, I really got in touch with a part I'd never even experienced before. And I think I texted you and said, this is coming from my young part. Do you remember me? And I was very tearful and what it felt like. And this is what it felt like as a child, that like you went away and therefore I don't exist.
Yeah.
Because there really was the attachment system that I experienced was not a consistent attachment. And when there was a third person, I didn't exist unless that person had room for me. And so, and these parts get blended. And I think that you're the person from my childhood and you're not, and I'm an adult and you can go away and you can have adult time. And I don't have to be a part of that. And we don't have to be talking the way that we normally do. But separating that out and pulling that power back to myself and my healing process, it's a process. And I feel like I've been doing this reenactment with you of wanting you to be, quote, the good whatever that I didn't have. Like you can be part of that and interdependence is okay. So I'm not saying that what we've been doing is wrong or bad. And it's not your responsibility. It's mine. And I want to take responsibility for that. So it's been a lot.
Yeah, it's really layered too. I can very much relate to almost like this object permanence problem where it's like, wait, I don't see you. Are you still there? Am I still here? Is it still here?
Mm-hmm.
Our connection and stuff. I also know that I feel this sometimes. So an example I'll give from my life is when I give my children something I didn't have. And I'm so happy and it can feel like such a triumph, right? Look, this happened, right? So I know this happened at their school, right? Kids weren't shamed. It was a learning opportunity. It was this, it was that. And right on the heels of feeling so good about being able to do that, I'll have that young response in my own self. So just want to howl and be so upset if it's something that I didn't get when I needed when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I also just want to point a couple of things, I guess, the process of it. There's you have to move through the process and to not, I think in relationships, sometimes that we do is we take a segment of the process and we're like, oh, that's how it is. And it's sort of it's on the theme of we're verbs, not nouns. And where we were a week ago versus 5 days ago versus 3 days ago versus yesterday versus right now. You can watch this beautiful process evolve. And the secure attachment, for me anyway, means I can trust that and just see where it goes. One point through this, there was I don't want to hear about it. And knowing that that's not going to be forever, right? That there's that equilibrium can be restored, that ruptures can be repaired, and you're just not there yet. Give it a little bit of time. And I think we did a good job of allowing some spaciousness and in that. And then with the parts work, I know I have felt this where it's funny, my visual that I have with my own parts when they are projecting, which we all do all the time. I love that quote. I don't know who said it, but it's if you understood the degree to which we are all projecting all the time, you'd never take anything personally ever again. you would just, the game would change and it would be like, oh, what can I understand about this person? Because I think the other part of the quote goes like, every criticism is actually a confession. Right? It was just, can be so lovely to think of it that way and to lose our own sense of self-defensiveness when it's especially in like really healthy relationships, ones that have been proven to be loving and supportive. But we're human and we're, depending on your history and the need to reenact, it's all coming up for healing, right? Is that it can get really sharp and intense. And so I have this image of my parts like kind of pressed up against the glass, like looking outside of me for resolution, for their needs to be met. And then gradually as you work on these like inner relationships and you become the focal point, it's like the parts come away from the window and they start looking towards you and you start looking into your own heart for that. Yeah. And then you can share it with someone. And it's not to say though, again, it's a process that when things get up, I call it like a tripwire, it'll happen again. Yeah. And that's okay. If we're equipped with what we need to be able to process it, it can be very successful. Yeah. And I think we've experienced that. And I'm thinking now, it's like, oh my gosh, that was really was that a week ago? Yeah,
a week and a day. I know.
What?
I know. I know one of the things that, because historically it was not okay. It was not okay for me to have feelings. It was not okay for me to cry. It was not okay for me to have anger. And I said this when we were talking last week when we didn't record, is I was in a fawn response and so afraid that you were going to leave me, like my anger would be too much and you would leave me. But I said, the truth is I'm really angry. But anger felt very dangerous to go into. And I when I'm in that young place, like my voice goes up when I cry, I can hear that young part. And as I processed more of this with my therapist, what I became painfully aware of, and I made sure to tell you before we talked about it today, because again, I didn't want to have any surprises, that historically what has happened is, and in the moment, what went on in my head is, I shouldn't have said anything. I've caused a problem. I just should keep my mouth shut. I ruin relationships. This is what happens. And I was able to verbalize that with you, and we talked about that. But the other part of this fawn response that comes up and this fear that people are going to leave me is what generally happens is once I come out of the fawn response, the rage comes up. And when you talk about howling, to me, what that is rage, this young, just vitriol rage. And historically what has happened is then I ended the relationship, that even though I initially go into that fawn, I become so angry that it becomes intolerable and I don't want it anymore. And that hasn't happened in this relationship. I don't feel like I've been careless or reckless with this, but this is a pattern that I've noticed. I just didn't have the awareness that I am too afraid to go into that anger response. And so I go into a fawn response. Yeah. And so being present for all of that has been really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's it, right? So if you can't own your own anger in the moment because it doesn't feel safe, that's the projection, right? You're projecting anger at me, onto me, right? Right. Yeah. And yeah, I just wish there was like, this is what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
As human beings, like this is what we do.
Well, and it makes me wonder how many people that don't like having I'm just speculating. So if this doesn't fit for you, I'm not trying to peg anything on anybody. But for people that don't like conflict, don't like getting angry, don't like other people getting angry, I really wonder how much of that is about it not being safe to express anger when you were a child and to have those feelings come up. And so it's just like what happened to me is my nervous system says, don't go into anger. That's dangerous. So go into a fawn response, or we just avoid conflict. And I'm needing to have a difficult conversation with someone. And because I don't want to, I am finding myself and I told you when we had this pinch last week that I gaslight myself, whatever I want, it's never enough. And I'm never going to be happy. And I just have to accept things how they are. And I have to make all these adjustments. For me, I think that's trauma, but I also think it's part of my autism that I have gotten messages about being too much. And so I've just learned to make myself very small because of that. And my guess is that this resonates for other people too. And especially in that moment, I had that thought of, I just should have not said anything because look at what happened.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, like in the moment, it's not really a choice, right? It's a nervous system response
Yeah.
that just comes like boom, just online, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes one of the best things we can do for ourselves is to ask for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Can I get back to you about this? Can I, or even just to suspend any kind of judgment until the process can roll out.
Yeah.
Right. And we can be patient and spacious with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I suspect too that PDA comes into this. And for a time, I asked, like, I don't want to hear about your partner because it was just really triggering for me. I came up with a very creative name.
That was fun. I love the creativity. I really do.
At first it was he who shall not be named until we came up with something. And then is it okay to just say, you think?
Oh, sure.
So then I just started calling him Igor.
Yes.
And I think that, like, I love that you were okay with that because that young part needed to be really angry and it didn't feel safe enough to be angry at you. It felt safe to be angry at him and to call him Igor and, to need some space. But I also think that those young parts need to have some sense of autonomy because the feelings were just huge. That the amount of wounding and crying and intensity that I experienced for a couple of days, like it was just deep. And it's interesting. I've used this analogy before in another context, but it felt like I'm a piece of Swiss cheese. And the wounding and the losing myself and feeling like, everything was falling apart and, I was alone and abandoned, felt like being in the whole part of the Swiss cheese. But I knew that there was solid Swiss cheese there. And so I as painful and difficult as it was, I knew that the solid parts of the cheese were there and the solid parts of the cheese are me. And like, I'm just in this hole until I'm not in the hole and I'm in the solid part. And I really have a lot of gratitude for that because I think it would have been very scary to go through this. And I even had the awareness in the moment. I think I even verbalized it to you. Like, I know that this has very little to do with you and what's going on in the moment. This is about my history. But having the awareness that after this day, the next 2 days, you and I did some you held space for me to really do some intense grief work. And then I continued to do it on my own and then did it with my own therapist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's just so important not to judge that and to give each other the benefit of the doubt and not get too reactive. I mean, I think that was a beautiful moment when we were just sharing space when neither one of us could really hold it for the other. Mm-hmm. And then, I pretty quickly was able to regain capacity. Not immediate. Like I probably needed 24 hours, right? Oh, we did. We touched base later that evening and stuff.
Well, you called me. I went paddling, which I was so grateful to get out on the water. And I was literally carrying my boat up with somebody else and you FaceTimed me and I didn't have time. And then I said, can I call you in 30 minutes? And then you were going to be busy. And at that point you were with Igor. And I said, fine. And then when I got my boat packed up on my car and left, then I went into rage. Like, how come he gets you? And, how come there's no time for me? Like, I cycled through that rage again and just had to let it be okay. It's not something I needed to share with you. But that's so much of my wounding of feeling like I was relegated to whatever was left because my needs weren't prioritized. I wasn't prioritized. And that's not to say that there could have been a third person in this relationship, but there could have been more stability in that attachment and my needs being acknowledged and having room for me. And my perception is it was an either or. And so I was very easily displaced. And so how could I expect any other relationship in my life to be different if that's the only thing I've ever experienced, which is why therapy and coaching can be so powerful because you get to re-experience that in the relationship with your practitioner and find that it can be different. And then you can generalize that to relationships outside of the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to recognize that, our brains are kind of geared up to recognize patterns and then are biased to only let in information that confirms the narrative that we're using. So that perspective taking, that being able to hold with curiosity and see what else is here. And It's funny. I had a thought, about the process. I thought, if I can speak for you, I guess, not for you, but, your stuff was the progression of don't tell Igor any of this to it's okay to share. And that was part of the process too. And I think
it was okay for you to share with Igor at the time.
That it was okay for me to share. And, I was curious and respectful at each step and wouldn't have, and still hasn't shared very much, probably more in this podcast than anything I've actually shared. But
hey, Igor, how's it going? Feel free to respond if you want now that you know everything.
Yes. And thankfully, he is very understanding and open.
Yeah. Well, I felt so blended with those parts, meaning that there's a difference of like, hi, this is Patricia the adult, and I have these young parts. And they're saying it's like, I was so blended and so projecting onto you that it was very hard for me to what we call shepherd those parts, where there's an adult that is there with these young parts. And I was so blended with everything, and it felt so big and so overwhelming that my suspicion is that I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment and didn't, I really don't know him very well. We really haven't had a direct conversation. And so I was probably afraid that he would think that this is who I am and this is my baseline. And this is very far away from what my baseline is. It is a part of my wounding and part of my healing, but it is not all of who I am. And I had to consciously remind myself that my relationship with you, is not that, my relationship from my childhood, because as this happened, I think on a Tuesday, and then on Thursday you went away until Sunday. So we had a little bit of time to reconnect, but not a whole lot of time. And then I didn't have my second therapy appointment until Friday. And then having you gone also activates a lot of historical things for me. And so noticing and being curious about what was coming up, but reminding myself that this is not that. It may feel like it, but this is not that.
Oh, it's one of my favorite phrases, right? That this is not that. Yeah, it's interesting. The little bit that I did share, I don't even know if I told you this. He readily got it. Like, and I think if you get it and you begin using these lenses, like you do, it's like someone gave you X-ray goggles and you can really get it and not take it personally and be there. And I thought this was sweet. And what I don't think I shared this with you is that that's the first thing he offered was that if you wanted to talk to him.
Oh, yes. That's very sweet.
Yeah. He came kind of right out with that and was just, again, I think it's the open-heartedness really. Right. And not the kind of doubling down or like whatever it is, which usually if we look at it matches onto early narratives that were formed to make sense of the world and protect us. It's almost like our personal mythologies. And, I know you and I have talked about it, like adulthood in many ways is a myth, except for taxes and stuff. Because these forces are still alive in us, thankfully, right? Because there's such a source of energy and joy once they can be freed up from their when their pain can be honored and fully witnessed and integrated and understood.
Yeah. Yeah. And I recognize too that I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but my husband and I have this rule that even when people tell us things like we're married and this is a primary relationship and we share things with each other that people may tell us in confidence. It's funny, I started to say this and then I wanted to back up, but I'm going to trust and proceed. That's what you do when you're in a marriage. That is the primary relationship. And I wanted to honor that you were going away with someone for 4 days. This was a big pinch, not a rupture, but a pinch in our relationship. And I wanted you to be able to process that if you needed to process it. Because my shame and embarrassment, the first big thing that Igor hears about me is about, how distraught and upset and blended I am. And I wanted you to have that freedom and to put I think probably my embarrassment. And I was so blended. Ugh, so blended.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be hard. Yeah. And, again, I just think that all in all, again, naming, like letting it hit the air. I know. So I was going through my own attachment wounding, not being projected on you, right? It's funny how there's like these parallel processes that happen, like, which was part of my not having any capacity and stuff. And now I've lost my train of thought.
Well, you went through something similar the previous weekend around somebody else going away and what that brought up for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know what went on for me, and we haven't talked about this, so I feel a little bit tentative. Is it what I want to talk about is my reaction to you having attachment stuff going on with somebody else and then feeling like I was experiencing the same thing. Is it okay to talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
So, you were having feelings about something happening. You were not in as much distress as I was, but some of your attachment stuff came up when this other person was gone for a few days and what the communication looked like or didn't look like and what that brought up for you. And you were telling that to me while I'm having many of the same feelings about you and your relationship, and how much of the young part is like, well, yeah, internally I'm thinking, well, yeah, I know what that's feeling like because that's what I'm experiencing with you right now. And trying to shepherd those parts and be compassionate because we weren't talking about me, we were talking about you, and this stuff hadn't really come to a head by then. And so we were navigating a lot of different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you okay hearing that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's true.
Yeah.
I think there's also a layer there with like me and taking care of my kids, right? Yeah. I just
your literal kids?
My literal kids, and trying to give them certain things in there. And then I know when I came out to visit you guys, I was like, when are you adopting me? Like, I think we do have those young parts that just really want to be centered. I think what I wanted to say was something along the lines of like, I really appreciate how quickly you were able to take perspective, right, in the give and take. And it's like when we get so stuck that we can't, see the other person and what they're needing and their limitations and it's like, that's when I know the youngest parts of me get very into like magical thinking or wish fulfillment or just wanting what they want without in a sort of, I remember that in my own kids when, it's like they would want to be up at the top of, upstairs and downstairs at the exact same time. Like some of the asks are not fulfillable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be able to sit there in the sorrow of that, I think is important, and to not be too threatened by it, that there's space in the relationship and that there's patience.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be able to come all the way through it.
Yeah. I believe that when there's the type of wounding that I don't know how clearly I'm conveying what it is, and I'm just going to trust that you will understand it however you understand it, the listener. There's this sense of entitlement, this young entitlement that what about me? Because there wasn't a what about me. There should have been, but there wasn't. And so there is in my adult self, this young part that's like, well, what about me? And that's pretty much always present. Then there's also this part that worries about taking up too much space and being too much and is constantly monitoring. So even when you and I were doing grief work, it was challenging for me to not want to put the focus on you because I don't want to be too much. I don't want to be too intense. I don't want to be too deep, and trusting that it's okay for me to take up space. And in this kind of post pinch time, for lack of a better word other than pinch, it's a word my therapist uses. It doesn't resonate for me, but that's the other thing. Like I haven't had a lot of language for this, that usually I'm very aware of what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, and I have language, and I just haven't had language. And part of me, you've said a lot, and it always annoyed me, of we come into this earth alone and we leave the earth alone, and that existential loneliness. And I vocalized, like, I don't like when you say that. And I believe that I was still in that place of thinking that you could meet this need that never got met before. And where I sit today is like, that time is gone. That need from that young place will never be met. That young part will never get that need met in that moment the way that she should have. Does that mean that there aren't people today that will love me and be here for me and support me? Of course. Can I show up for myself and give that part those needs? Of course. And that piece that never got met is never going to get met. And I've really gotten in touch with some of this existential loneliness. And I often had, you often, because of the time difference, you'll polo me in the morning. So when I wake up, there's a polo. And when there wasn't a polo, I'd get very dysregulated. So part of this pulling back and recentering on myself is, waking up in the morning and before I check my phone, check in with myself, with my parts, how I'm doing. I had one morning where I didn't even listen until I'd gotten up and I had a client in crisis and some other things going on. And so again, kind of focusing on my own center. But what we talked about yesterday via Polo was you and I work very well when there's intensity, when there's need, when there's a lot going on. And in the absence of that, there's a part of me that's like, do I know how to be a friend? Do I know how to show up if I'm not having high intense needs or you're not having things that are going on? And from the perspective of addiction, oftentimes when addicts get in relationships where there's not addiction and drama, they feel like this isn't a relationship, it's boring because there's not this intensity. And so you and I have kind of had a couple conversations about like, there's not a lot going on. That kind of feels a little weird because for me, I'm taking ownership of my parts and not coming to you to be the primary person to meet those needs. You can be here, you can support me. That interdependence is beautiful. So I want to be very clear that I'm not saying I no longer have needs and I don't reach out to you for those needs, but I'm the one that needs to be primarily responsible for those.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where I like my metaphor of like eating strawberries. Like we can share them, but nobody can eat it for you.
Yeah.
And I do remember having those moments of, oh my gosh, what if? I think it was very present I know it was very present for me. That sense of loss or even just the anticipatory loss. And that all can be kind of tracked back onto some of those existential things, which, I do remember I would want to talk about and you would hate. But I think it's, it's almost like it is a universal thing we all share, really, like these existential questions. And whew, I'm here. I think that was the one lovely thing when we were really in it was I'm here. I'm a mess, but I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. I really had questioned because my nervous system felt relatively regulated. So either I was regulated or I'm really good at dissociating and compartmentalizing. And in any case, I'm okay with that because I know that historically when there have been relationship things or things that I've recorded episodes about, my thinking gets obsessive. I've got looping. I have intrusive thoughts. I can't sleep. Really didn't have a lot of that. I think the day of or the next day you had called me and I missed a call and I reached out to you because my fear was that you had decided you didn't want to be friends anymore. Like those trauma responses are just there. And I named it and we talked about it and, we did the repair work that we needed to do.
Such a gift to name it. Oh, I actually think that might have been what I was going to say was like how intense my desire to hide can be. And that doesn't let any of this kind of stuff get worked out or hit the air or be shared or be addressed.
Yeah.
And so and that feels directly connected to shame and definitely a trauma response and like the kind of the hyper independence that I can kind of go into.
Yeah. Well, I would suspect with a PDA profile, and what I was aware of is this high dependency needs coming up and then not wanting that PDA to be dependent and wanting I don't want to have needs. I don't want to need you. I don't want you because it feels so like there's such a loss of autonomy in that high level of what felt like dependency in the moment.
Yeah. I've been so stuck on that end of the dial for so long.
Yeah.
And now that's kind of been my curve is coming back into it's okay to have needs. It's okay to have desires. And the sharpness of feeling, because I don't know how I verbalized it or if I verbalized it, but I know in those moments there was just so much fear and grief around the idea of loss.
Well, we both said while we were on the not recording last week, how much we counted on each other and needed this friendship and how hard it would be to not have that. So even in the moment, we had that awareness.
Yeah. And to be able to be vulnerable with that and not have to protect myself under all these layers of.
Yeah. My fear, and I verbalized it on FaceTime, and I said this, we're having a very public conversation because somebody was helping me carry my kayak up. There was a group at the bay that was right there. There were people around us. And because I had my phone in a waterproof case, I couldn't adjust the volume down. So it was a very public conversation that was very brief.
Sure, I was cursing.
No, I don't think you were. But my fear was, how do we reintegrate into the relationship that historically there'll be a big, I'm going to say, rupture in other relationships. And then in one relationship, I just said, I need space and didn't say when I was coming back. And I left for a long time. And I think the next day something peripheral happened and you were chatting about it. And like, I just had that relief of like, oh, we're having a quote normal connection that's not about us and about something else. But I verbalized to you, like, I have fear about how do we step back into the relationship to do the work around this. And because, I didn't have my therapy appointment till Friday and you were leaving on Thursday and we had to figure out, like, I don't want to hear about Igor. Do we talk? Do we not talk while you're gone? What am I needing? Had to be in the unknown and not know, like, is this my adult talking? Is this my child talking? Am I blended? Am I acting out? And we did a really great job of figuring that stuff out because, I want the rules from somebody who's not involved to tell me how, like what's okay and what's not okay. And we really had to do it on our own.
Yeah. Well, that's been a big theme for me lately is just managing expectations.
Yeah.
And watching the meaning that I'm making out of things and then being able to test that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at us.
I know.
We got this.
We got this. We got this. Yeah.
I'm thinking because this was the format we were talking in. Right?
Oh,
we were in, this app that you use for our recording. We were not recording, but so much was happening.
Would have been interesting if we would have hit record. I don't know if we could have had a conversation with that awareness of being recorded, but
yeah, I don't know. It's funny.
Yeah. I dissociated. I got scared and I just dissociated for a while, which is what happens when there's conflict. Okay, whatever you say. I'm sorry, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was almost like a little parallel process going on.
Yeah.
I just know I was crying a lot.
I was too. Like my freeze response, my dissociation is no feelings. Just be a robot, be here, don't react. Yeah. And I do that a lot. And oftentimes you've poloed me or something, or we'll be talking and I find myself bracing because and it just happened in therapy the other day that we're really paying attention to when I start to dissociate. And it's funny, she's a coach. And I feel like if I say coach, it doesn't sound right. It's coaching. She was watching me and said, did something just happen? And I said, no, but as we backed it off, I didn't know where she was going. And I expected that she was going to say something that was going to hurt my feelings, which she doesn't do. But that's often when, somebody says, I want to talk to you about something. And like, whoop, I dissociate because I anticipate hearing something very painful about myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just these conditioned responses sometimes to the way things were habitually phrased or all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah.
Who would have known there's so much bleeping trauma still? Woohoo. And what I believe is the choice is to work through it or to not work through it. And if I don't work through it, I'm going to get activated and triggered. And I really created a lot of suffering. That's not the right language, but I don't have better language. I've experienced a lot of suffering in expecting you to show up in a way that you can't. And when you don't meet those needs, I emotionally go through a lot, whether I share it with you or not. And like, that's harmful to me. That is really harmful to me, to my younger parts, to my nervous system. And so part of taking back that centering on myself and being responsible and not expecting you to be my primary place where I get my primary needs met. I don't know how to articulate it. It's not that I can't go to you and say, hey, I'm hurt, I'm struggling. Can you be here? Can you support me? Can I cry? But there's a difference of having my adult there and knowing that that's my responsibility and I'm asking you for help, as opposed to the expectation is that you should be here to meet these needs. I shouldn't have to ask for it. And then when you don't meet them, I get disappointed and angry and hurt and attach a lot of meaning to how quickly you respond, when you respond. That's not about me. And I've really had to, I'm embarrassed, but I'm just going to say, recently, I'm not looking like, have you watched my polos? Where are you at? Are you on your way home? Like, those are attachment issues. And it's like, I'm just going to trust that you have things going on and that I matter. And if I need to know that I matter, I can either meet that need or I can ask you. But really working on not attaching meaning to the things that have created suffering for me. And not that you've done anything wrong, but that's young stuff. That's really young stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
How are you hearing that?
It's great. No, totally fine. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Well, it's funny.
Me? Am I okay?
You know I love you so much. Yes. Yes. Well, I'm also just thinking of the way, like, historically, that would be like a perfect jigsaw puzzle piece into my, I used to call it like white knight kind of syndrome kind of thing, where it's like, oh, I'll do it, and it's like, no, I still can't eat the strawberry for you. Like, it's even if I would want to. And I think there have been times where I really have, and I'm just going to show up and be the best friend ever. Yeah. And, it's like yes. Yeah. Oh, my dear.
I think this is the last thing, and we do need to wrap up. I do think what happens in relationships. So if this were another type of relationship, and I have done this in our relationship with you, we've talked about this a little bit, but if this were another type of relationship, what it could look like is like with a romantic partner. If you love me, you would bring me flowers. If you love me, you would send me love notes. If you love me, you would, whatever those things are, but the bar is always moving and changing. So if I had a partner who is willing to do all those things, that after a while, the flowers aren't enough and the notes aren't enough. And so that standard is always moving and shifting. And if I had a partner that believed that it really was about them, and if they just did the right thing, then I would feel loved. That is exhausting. And I was doing some of that with you, teasing out what is it about my needs as an adult that make me feel loved, and what are those things that are about that young part, kind of moving the bar and doing some testing, which is what wounded young parts are going to do around attachment. So I'm not going to have shame around it, but you and I have talked a little bit about what some of that looks like. And I'm trying to really dial back on that and be responsible for my needs, and not use those as measures of how much you care, how attentive you are, to trust the relationship, and to not use external ways of measuring if I think you love me because you did blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can feel that in myself when I get into those types of checking behaviors, or, and it's just so important to just be able to kind of lay out there with whoever, right? If it's a trusted friend, if it's a therapist, a coach, ideally, in my mind, it would be something that you could do like right in the crucible of the relationship, but that's not always possible.
Both people have to really have done their work and be grounded and to know what their wounded parts are. And I feel really grateful that you and I are able to do this work. And I'm really clear that there's a part of this that when I'm able to take it outside of our relationship and do some healing work, it feels like it's about you, but it's not. But I really need to do that work outside the relationship. I believe that will give us more freedom in our relationship, unless the word that comes to mind is burden and responsibility. And I don't feel like I have very good language for this, but I'm grateful that we can do the work, and that's not about this relationship. And so I'd like to do that work elsewhere.
Right. Yeah.
We did a good job.
I think so.
Yeah. I really appreciate you and the work that we do.
Oh my gosh, me too.
I did have thoughts of like, what if this doesn't repair? What if we don't do the podcast? How do I not have the listeners feel terrible? Like, that is kind of a disadvantage of being so open and transparent.
Yeah. Well, good thing. Not today.
Kids, we're okay.
Not today.
Hopefully we did some really good modeling.
Yes.
So. All right. I love you.
I love you.
I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, dear.
Hey again. So I'm curious to know, did that resonate for you? Did you relate? Do you have wounded parts? Do you act stuff out? Do you want people to meet those needs that they really can't? Maybe it pissed you off hearing that. It used to piss me off when I used to hear Jen talking about, we're born alone, we die alone. Because I thought that Jen could be the one that was going to fix me, heal me, save me. And she can't. It's me. It's all on me. And there's some loneliness that comes up around that, some existential loneliness. And maybe we'll talk about that more in future episodes. So hopefully you heard things that felt good. Maybe they pushed your buttons. Hopefully in a way that maybe is an indication that there's some healing that needs to happen. And when you're ready, you'll do that healing and not before that. If you're interested in working with Jen, you can reach out to her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. If you want to reach out to me, I'm at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I have a contact form on my website. If you want to shoot me an email, You can either go to my website and my email is there, or you can send me an email at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. I got some really nice comments from the most recent episode. I think it's 239, about we need to change the narrative around too much. So thank you very much if you reached out to me. I really appreciate the feedback. It means a lot to me. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how your brain is wired. You have a right to have wounding. You have a right to howl. You have a right to fawn. You have a right to rage. You have a right to project. You have a right to have blended parts. You have a right to cry, to feel ragey. I think I've said that a couple times. I must have a lot of rage. I do have a lot of rage. You have a right to cry, to get support, to feel the pain, to get in touch with your parts, to reach out and get support, to do writing. There is an existential loneliness when we realize that really we are the ones that are here to meet our needs. And it doesn't mean that there can't be other people that are here to love us and support us, but ultimately, it's our job to meet our needs. I know sometimes that sucks if you, like me, believe that other people could do that. And if I look at my relationship with women, I tend to look for very nurturing relationships where I'm able to get some needs met that are really important for me to have. And it doesn't mean that that nurturing is not valuable or valid or okay to have in our relationships. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to not know what you need. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to feel like you're too much. You don't have to like everyone. Everyone doesn't have to like you. I'm not for everybody and everybody's not for me. You're not for everyone. Everybody's not for you. I hope you're doing well. Have a blessed day.